Proving Grounds. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, VerseRight, Protivity, Tenable, Amazon, and Source of Knowledge.
I'm not clapping for Tenable.
I will. That's why I'm sitting in the middle.
So as Guy McDudefella has said, we're going to be recording this talk, and I'm going to be running the mic. So just please wait for the mic before you ask your question. So, have you ever wondered why call for paper reviewers drink so much? Are you tired of having talks rejected from conferences without knowing why? Would you like to know what really makes reviewers happy or irritated? Well, stick around for our next panel on Call for Papers 101. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. We're going to start out with introductions, right?
Yep.
All right, great.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm David. I'm your erstwhile moderator today, otherwise known as David of the Clan CFP.
Yeah. Oh, hi, I'm Megan Tottenkoph. I'm a senior security analyst with, or consultant with Rapid7.
My name is Moey. I avoid work on a regular basis, so I'm in management.
I'm Guy McDudefella. I am a compliance audit research engineer for Tenable Network Security, which is way better than Rapid9.
Oh.
So really quickly, David, before we get started, in all honesty, and I was giving Eric a little bit of a hard time earlier, I think there's going to be two types of people in the room right now. Either one, people who are part of CFP review boards. This is why we don't take you places.
You're not my real dad.
Either people who are part of CFP review boards and want to make a comment or something, and we want this to be conversational. This is B-sides afterward, overall. And then also people who have active questions. So if you do have a question at any time, feel free to interrupt us, raise your hand. Eric will run over there with the mic and give it to you, and we could talk about it. So, sorry about that.
No, quite right. So I mean, actually, I'm going to touch on that a little more. So, I mean, ostensibly, this was about, how CFP works and how to get your talk accepted. But if you have questions, like Moey said, about, you're on a CFP committee and you're trying to figure out, how do you decide what talks to accept or not accept, or how do you figure out the criteria and things like that, please, feel free to ask those questions as well. We're very agnostic. As long as it has something to do with a CFP, we're good.
Why do I have two?
You're stereo. You're special.
Oh, okay.
Two Tottenkopfs.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start with just we were discussing this earlier, and the first rule, which is actually also the second rule for CFPs, is
follow the directions.
And
follow the directions.
So there were a couple of submissions that we received this year that felt that some of our fields in OpenConf were optional. If we put something there, we want you to respond. We want you to give us that information. Don't just give us a couple line blurb for your abstract and think it's sufficient for your outline as well, because it's not.
Right. If they ask for X, Y, and Z, give them X, Y, and Z. Don't add anything. Don't feel like Z is optional. If there's a 2,000 word limit in the field, try to use as much of that as possible. What you want to make sure you do is you're conveying your thoughts clearly, but more importantly, you know how to follow instructions. This is your first introduction to the con overall, so you want them to know, yeah, working with me is going to be a positive experience because they're putting some trust in you.
And if the CFP instructions are things like new talks only, don't submit the talk you gave at B-Sides Ontario. If it's calling for new speakers, don't submit the talk you gave at DEF CON. You're not a new speaker. There are instructions there. The CFP committee is looking for certain types of talks for certain tracks of the conference, and going against that isn't going to win you any favors.
And also just a little bit about that. So with the Proving Grounds track in particular, we ask for new speakers only. And it's a little cloudy because we have to do the announcement via Twitter. What does that mean? So we say no national conferences, things like DevCon, DerbyCon, ShmooCon. BSides Las Vegas and BSides San Francisco are included in that as well. But if you've spoken at another regional conference, like one of the smaller BSides or another regional conference that wasn't recorded, you're still applicable to apply for Proving Grounds.
So one of the things that was alluded to is that unless you are an incredibly well-known speaker, and even then, with your committee, when you submit a CFP, this is your first impression. And one of the things that I encounter a lot, I'm pretty sure like my panelists here will agree, is that people don't always spell check or grammar check their submission. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, because there was some rather strident language being used in the speaker room.
Guy, I think you had some good thoughts on that.
If you were of the opinion in high school that English class was something you were never going to use, you were fucking wrong. Use punctuation, use capital letters, follow a style guide. Go get a style guide. Go watch James Arlen's talks on how to communicate to other people. Because the man is not wrong. A lot of people in InfoSec are in technical roles. And so we're not responsible for direct communication with clients or direct communication more than 2 or 3 sentences in a ticket or 2 or 3 sentences in an email. Unfortunately, when you're writing a talk or writing a CFP response, it is the exact opposite. You need to be verbose, you need to be clear, you need to be concise, and you need to be well organized. And we get talks that look like a fucking E. Cummings poem.
So,
but with less structure.
With less structure.
And to build on that, even if you're not going to go and get a style guide, there's tools out there that will help you out. I'm not a great writer. I know that. That's a weakness of mine. But I use things like Grammarly to help me out, to review what I'm going to submit before I submit it, to make sure that I'm good and I'm signed off. You have to look at it from the reviewer's perspective as well. In some cases, and David could talk to this even a little bit more, these folks are reviewing tens, if not hundreds, of submissions. So immediately not being able to cohesively understand the writing is going to put you at a disadvantage, because it's like, I have to figure this out in order for you to convey your idea to me. What makes me think that you're going to be able to do this, in front of 50, 100 people?
CFP board will, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The CFP board of reviewers will spend on average 2 to 5 minutes per talk in the first round just to figure out whether or not you are sane enough to put in front of a group of people, right? And if you're not able to convey what you want to talk about in 2 minutes of writing, we're just going to ignore your talk and you're not going to make it onto the second round of review.
So I do have something to say about the verbosity thing. I actually am fine if you're concise.
Yeah.
Like, if you can clearly state what you want to do in 10 words instead of 50, that is totally fine. I just need to be able to understand, okay, this is what you want to talk about, and the why, and how you're going to get me to the main purpose of your talk.
But the thing is that you really can't give a CFP committee too much detail about your talk.
Exactly.
And also...
No, as I say, so, and actually I'm going to sort of take that back, because we actually had several submissions where people were actually pasting code, and sample code into the, and that's not actually a good example of, that's actually a little too much detail, because in my case, at least for a lot of talks.
Yeah, it would depend on the audience, I would argue.
Right.
So for things like DEF CON, for example, you might want to submit code to be like, hey, listen, I'm not just talking out of my butt.
But that's a situation where if you can submit supplemental materials,
right? Exactly.
That's where you submit that. You don't put it in your abstract, or you don't put it in your
supplemental.
That's what supplemental materials are for. Are things like presentations, white papers, things that establish your bona fides or your qualifications to speak, even if you're a new speaker. Say, look, here's this white paper I wrote. Here's this. Here's a link to my GitHub repository if it's a more code-oriented conference.
Exactly,
Here are blog posts I've written on the topic. Here's a sample presentation I did elsewhere.
And also, if you have sources that you used while you're writing your talk, like, okay, this is where I'm drawing my ideas from, that can be helpful too.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I love it when someone submits a citation saying, hey, I'm talking about this, but it also relates to this other talk in a different way. And then I'll go in and look at it. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting, actually. And I can see, okay, this is a pre-existing talk that's been done before, yes, but this person has a new or different outlook on it.
Citing work when you're submitting a CFP response shows us two things. First, it shows us that you have a grasp of the subject matter. And it also shows us that you've done your homework and you're not just trying to reiterate something somebody else has already said, you're building upon it. And that's important. I mean, the whole point of giving a talk in front of people is to advance the state of the art. And so by showing us citations in your CFP response, you're showing us that you're willing to do the work in order to advance the state of the art.
So, and speaking of, since we're sort of on this general trend, one of the places that we've significantly seen issues over the past several years are talks where someone is releasing a new tool or discussing a new tool that they've been involved with, and they don't make it clear whether it's a free tool, a commercial tool, open source, shared source, whatever. And what ends up happening is the submission ends up reading like a product pitch. And the feedback we give is, this sounds like a product pitch. And a good chunk of the time the person comes back and says, oh, it's open source, and you don't need to, it's being released by my company who happens to be a commercial vendor, but you don't need to use the rest of the company's products. You can use it independently, you can build it yourself. And we go, tell us. Like, and does anything that looks like a product pitch at just about every conference is going to get automatically rejected. As B-Sides especially, we're not here to let you advertise.
If I wanted to hear product pitches masquerading as talks, I'd go to RSA.
Anyways, yeah. And plus a lot of CFPs, when you read the instructions, will actually say we don't want vendor pitches.
Exactly.
So that goes back to following directions.
And a lot of cons will actually have a separate area for vendors. I mean, you don't need to do product pitches in talks at Black Hat when you've got the entire vendor floor with an auditorium directly for product pitches.
And just to add on to that, Black Hat's one of them, so is RSA, where there are, just to add on to that, there's conferences like those where there are tracks that are designated as, what you could think of as pay for play. Like it's clearly, it's kind of like when you go to Google and you search and you have their search results and you have the sponsored listings that are clearly separated. And they're both useful in their own ways as long as they're separated.
Exactly.
Yep.
Any questions so far, or we don't have to stick to the model.
Make this man work, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's frustrating to me, I probably submit to somewhere between 5 to 10 conferences a year, and a frustration of mine is that it's kind of a black box. When I have asked about how do these talks get selected, I've had varying answers all over the board. Sometimes there's a system where they get scored, and that scoring process is a matrix, and it's very organized, and they use like Open Conference, and there's that. And sometimes it's like, we kind of sit around and drink a bunch of beers, and if we like it, then it gets advanced, and if we don't like it, it gets thrown on the floor. Do you see any conferences moving towards some transparency when they say we're announcing a call for papers, and we use a 3-person panel with a scoring system like this, and these are the people on the panel? Because that makes a huge difference in the way that I submit, and I think that providing that transparency might help give some context to the people that are submitting.
So BSides Las Vegas is one of the conferences, and David could actually talk to this. So whether you're submitting to Proving Ground or you're submitting to the general CFP, here, we have our CFP panel that reviews, but everyone is required on every talk that they review to provide some kind of feedback. We typically, David, correct me if I'm wrong, especially on the Proving Ground side, we will send that feedback directly to the submitter, just so that we're saying, hey, we didn't think this was fully baked out, or we liked it, and but we weren't, you know, we had some better content or what's going on. I know in previous years before Guy has joined us, we actually would sit down with people that were not accepted and say, okay, this is what happened. And we have half an hour calls on that.
Yeah.
So in the past at B-Sides, we have published who the CFP committee is, and we should actually get back to that. It kind of fell down purely because there was too much to do and not enough time to do it all. For the purposes of transparency, what we do here for B-Sides Las Vegas for the main tracks is that we have a scoring system. All talks get scored on a scale of 1 to 6, and then we basically break down the scores by track that you submitted to, and it more or less we have enough talks that it basically falls out on a curve, and we sort of pick a spot. We don't have a hard spot. You never really sort of spot where it's clear that anything over this line this year is a clear accept. Anything below this number is a clear decline, and then we end up with each track every year is like 20 to 40 talks, depending on the track, that would be fine for that score-wise are great for the conference, but we have like 6 slots left. And that's when, in past years, just me, and this year I have a co-chair, we sit down and we look at the talks, all these talks, and say, what makes the most coherent conference? What do we think really pulls that track together in a coherent frame of thought? Or is there a talk that we think is really important for people to see? And then we sort of go back and forth, and there's a little hand-wavy stuff at that point, honestly. And we say, okay, this looks like this is the best talk we can put together, the best conference we can put together that'll make for the best, the attendees will enjoy or find the most useful. And then we sort of go down a little bit and say, okay, here are the backup speakers that we think will continue that trend. And then we say, damn, we have another 15 talks that we just couldn't accept, and that sucks.
Actually, can I just continue on this question, because I think it piggybacks well off a point we wanted to make a little bit later, but really around, it is, I hear what you're saying, Jay, because it is frustrating, because I have had talks accepted at DerbyCon, but not accepted at Sector, and things along those lines. I think to kind of internalize it, you really have to understand your audience,
yes,
right? And ensure that, hey, not every talk is for every venue. And it may not be anything on your submission or a problem with your submission directly. It just to David's point, they're trying to fit a specific theme or fit a specific feel to the event. And no offense, but maybe your talk wasn't part of it. Because, like I said, my talk, I've had this exact same submission, great detail in both. Derby took it, Sector said, no, that's okay.
And also, there's quite a few places that don't give you feedback by default, so do make sure that you follow up for feedback. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, we try to give, each of us give feedback for why we rejected something, other than not following the directions. But, it takes a while to tastefully state why you're rejecting certain things.
Yeah, I've had, and again, it's okay to ask a CFP board why a talk was rejected if you don't get feedback. I've had talks that I've submitted to ShmooCon that got rejected, and the first time I was just like, oh man, this sucks. The second time I was like, why did you guys reject this talk? And they said, because the subject area is good, but we had talks like this in previous years and we want to give the subject a rest for a little bit. And that's reasonable. Okay, it wasn't me, it's the fact that they're trying to broaden the perspectives of the attendees of ShmooCon.
But frankly, B-Sides as a movement started 8 years ago? 7 years ago?
Something like that.
Something like that. I lost track of what number we're at. Because a bunch of us had talks get rejected by Black Hat, and the feedback consistently was, these are good talks and we just don't have enough room. And we said, you know what, we really want to give these talks. And someone said, I have a house. Come to my house and
screw it, we'll have our own conference with blackjack and hookers.
And someone else said, I work for whoever it was, and we'll stream it for free online. And we said, done. And we showed up, and B-Sides became a thing. Purely because we had there was more content. This happens to Black Hat every year in DEF CON as well. They get way more talks than they can accept, and to a certain extent, it's a roll of the dice.
Remember how I said a few minutes ago that we take 2 to 5 minutes per talk in the first round? That's because you all submit a fuck ton of talks. We don't have time to sit down and give every talk a measured Unfortunately, the CFP boards are relatively small, and it's impossible to go through and give detailed, nuanced feedback on every talk. And so sometimes when you're at when you're talking about a conference like Derby or DEF CON or Black Hat or Sector, it's impossible for the CFP board to give you the feedback that they want to give. And that's why it's important to ask.
And that actually leads me to another next question for my panel, and then we'll get to your question, which is, we were discussing earlier, titles matter. And title, even harder than writing a good abstract, is coming up with a good title. And it's an unfortunate truth that, so B-Sides had 180 some submissions across the 4 core tracks. That's a lot of submissions to go through. And I've been on the review board for ShmooCon, and they get even more than that. I know RSA gets literally thousands. So you need to, and especially the scale of something like RSA, they're going to get 10 talks about the same topic. They're almost identical. And so you need to be able to catch the reviewer's eyes just so that you get more reviews, just people looking at your talk and spending more time on it. And a catchy title is really hard. And I think my panelists will share some of the formats or the sort of macros they're really tired of.
Okay, guys. If any of you submit a talk that is word, ever again, you're going to make everybody on a CFP board have a sad. Also, blank for fun and profit. It's been done. Stop. Stop. Please.
You just made Gattaca happy.
I'm glad.
Okay, so today I delivered my first presentation at Proving Ground.
Congratulations.
And the feedback has been good, as this man has attested. So where do I go from here? I want to keep giving presentations.
Submit them to other cons.
Yeah.
Do I submit the same one to other cons? Do I have to now come up with new stuff? If I come back to B-Sides, do I never come back to Proving Ground? It's only the other
Yeah, you'll
tracks?
never be back here ever again.
Okay.
Because that's the design.
So I'm done with the single A, I'm now in the double A league. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Whoa.
So on that note, as a guy who's local to you and who's telling you that the B-Side CFP is opening next week, yes. Some conferences feel different. I don't know about the rest of BSidesLV. Different conferences feel differently about the same material. My mantra is I never give the same talk twice. Sometimes I give the same talk twice, but it's not really the same one. Like it'll be the same basic idea, but it'll have new material or updated or ongoing research or whatever.
And, so if you are going to submit the same talk, a lot of CFPs have the question, have you submitted this presentation before, and if so, where? And it's your job to say, okay, yes, I gave it before, but here's how it's markedly different or improved from before, because otherwise, you're just giving them old material.
Like I gave a half hour here, so if I'm applying for an hour-long slot, obviously there's more material.
Right.
Okay. Is it kosher to submit more than one CFP?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Vote or submit and submit often.
An important thing though is, so like we had over the years, and this happens every year, we have someone who will submit almost the same talk multiple times.
Yeah.
So they'll be like, they'll change the name slightly, they'll change some of the wording around, but it's really the same talk. And pretty much as soon as that happens, I go, click, 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 deny ball.
Remember, the whole point of giving
That's
talks
my
at a
personal
conference
analysis
is to advance the
against
state of the art. And if you're giving the same talk multiple times, you're reforming leftovers. You're not advancing the state of the art.
So, back to the thing I'm submitting. Yeah, but for submitting multiple ones, you're saying that if I say, well, I have an idea about this X and one about Y and one about Z,
That's great.
you may say, well, X and Y, but Z,
Yeah, right. So we actually had
Yeah,
people
we do
submit,
that.
we actually had someone submit 3 talks about 3 different topics, and we said, maybe a yes.
Yeah.
But then also,
Or we had someone else submit 2 talks, and I was like, oh man, I wish I could have both of these talks. I'm gonna go for this one. And I really wish I could have accepted both, but there's only so much time. And I want to, diversify speakers. So I'm gonna go for this one, so I'm sure this other one will get accepted somewhere else.
Yeah.
Just my only warning about that is be careful because they may be accepted.
Oh.
and then you have to do the work because I've been in that position as well where I've had multiple talks.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I did.
It's stressful as a speaker.
Yeah, and I can attest that
I had 2 talks that thankfully I co-presented. They got accepted and placed back to back. So and the more community the event, the more probably likely that you may get accepted for multiple talks.
Yeah. So yes, that's actually a problem. So RSA in particular is traditional to submit multiple talks because it's so much of a crapshoot. 2 years ago, I ended up giving 5 talks.
Yeah.
And one I had to do twice, so it was six slots in 3 days, and it was murder.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, yeah, feel free to submit multiple talks as long as you're following the directions. Follow the fucking directions. As long as you're following the directions. Yeah, follow the fucking directions. It's not that hard. You guys have been doing it since, well, no, you guys haven't been doing it. That's why we're all here. But in this one case, follow the directions.
Yes.
I have a question, and I'm happy to hear this from either side, even for the submitters or the reviewers, because like Moey, like I do a lot of both. One of the things that I get tired of, and BSidesLV is fantastic about, is I'm tired of going to conferences and seeing everybody look like me. Right?
You mean like an
like a white dude with a beard and a black shirt? I mean, that's just the reality.
I'm wearing a blue shirt.
Yeah, like
I'm young. Well, youngish.
Okay, well, I'm not. Right. No, but we fit. In other words, it is important to me for a lot of different reasons. I know it's important to a lot of people that, certainly from the speaker level, we get people who are not traditionally as represented. I am curious both from the side of how do we encourage more of these submissions, because I want that, and how can we make sure that, so how can we make that happen more from your perspective? I think I'm hitting the hot button here.
I'm just like, Jesus, take the wheel.
Toddy's moved back to the south, and
This is my response. This is my response.
So first of all, as a reviewer, the name of the person, so with Tottenkopf, we don't see the name of the person when we first review the talk. And I would actually caution against looking at the name or Googling the handle until after you've determined whether or not you want to accept the talk. Because I'm going to be pissed off if I find out that my talk was accepted because I'm a female versus the merits of my talk.
Sure. Right. However, as someone who was involved in several conferences, I have very little problem when getting to that window of we have 20 talks that we would like to accept and 4 slots to make sure there's diversity. Because
if they are all on the same
yes, that's the thing.
level.
Well, the thing is, I'm down to the bucket. I don't get names until I have my bucket of I have 10 talks and 4 slots. I'm going to bias because the thing is, there's a lot of inherent bias in the system, as you know.
Yeah.
And so that's just the thing is, like when B-Sides started, we had almost no women submitting.
Yeah.
And now
we had that panel on the first B-Sides.
Right. That was the only one that was submitted.
Well, that
and I agree with that. Right. Exactly. And now the submission rate is like 40% female.
Yeah.
And
That's fantastic.
Like
it is
last
amazing.
year, half of our
There's work to
speakers
be
at
done.
Ruby
because one of the ways you get more women submitting is by having representation of women, and now it's not a problem because women submit now. Because trust me.
So there are far smarter people who have given far better talks and presentations on this than I.
I want to see your
But one of the reasons why I love this program, why I love the Proving Grounds program, is because you're pairing people with mentors. And I think mentorship is one of the biggest things that we can do to sort of work towards solving this problem. Because a lot of people come from backgrounds, and a lot of people, women especially, and friends that I've talked to are saying, well, I don't know if I'm good enough to submit this talk. I'm like, you're doing amazing work in cutting-edge areas with really cool shit. You need to submit this talk.
But
imposter syndrome is really strong, and mentorship is one of the ways we counter that.
But this is having a code of conduct on the website to start with matters.
Yeah.
It actually will change your submission metrics hugely.
Yeah.
Just on the basis of that. An explicit statement to that effect.
Yeah. So I would say mentor. Like, even outside the B-Sides program, just if
I was talking to him earlier, one of the other conferences I'm involved in, we were a little bit inspired. So one of the other conferences I'm involved in, we were actually inspired by Proving Ground in particular. So when we were first having the discussions, You know, because you have 3 buckets, right? You have the talks that you're absolutely not going to accept. It's just not going to happen. You have the talks that you really want to, and you have some that maybe, you don't know, right? That they, with the right thing. So we're trying to find ways to assign mentors, or do some sort of mentorship in some.
Yeah.
We try to bias towards speakers who are less well known.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to say.
Right.
When I have 10 speakers in 4 slots, I'll look at the names, see their speaker resume, and those who are the least experienced or have something that's actually like a fresh voice, I'm more willing to choose those individuals.
Right. Exactly. And frankly, like, I don't need random speaking slots.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I've given literally hundreds of talks at this point in my career.
Oh.
I'm old. And frankly, I mean, that's the thing about Proving Ground, and this is true, is that conferences need good speakers. They need speakers, period. And I got told by a mentor of mine 12 years ago, she said, you should be speaking at conferences. I said, I have nothing to say. She said, trust me, you do. And once you give them 2 or 3 talks, you'll become a known quantity. And then you'll start getting asked to submit to conferences. And it's totally true, even now. And the best mentoring you can do in the community is, I was talking to someone at the airport. I was sitting on our layover, and they're like, well, I've been thinking about submitting to conferences, but I don't really have anything to say. And I said, what do you do? And they said, well, I work at a storage company that does storage in the cloud. And I said, well, and I have to make sure that I run security for them. I'm like, so how do you deal with compliance and your customers? And I'm like,
You've got to talk.
I'm like, okay, you have a talk right there. Write that up. You're submitting to Proving Ground next year. And I said, okay.
Yeah, and they got accepted, didn't they?
No, this is for now. This was literally like
this year.
I'm only
because
here.
we had a storage security talk this year.
Yeah, this is like
so.
they're a cloud storage in the cloud vendor, and he's like, I'm like, okay, you have a submission now, and they're like, okay, I'm submitting to Proving Ground next year. So, that's just.
And the other thing, I'm sorry, I just want to on diversity for one more second. The other thing we do in Proving Ground to kind of rule that out as a factor at all is a lot of our process, and Toddy hit on it on the CFP review side, is that's blind to us. We don't see names, we don't see anything. But when we're doing our pairing between speaker and mentor, the speakers and the mentors get to choose their speakers. They don't know who that speaker is, so they don't know if they're choosing a male or female. So they're basing, hey, I really want to jump on this based on the content and why this talk is chosen. So that's another thing is try to remove that diversity as even a factor because the content's standing on itself.
Yeah.
We
So,
have a question
any
here.
question?
Awesome. So we've been talking a lot on the sort of B-sides or larger conference style, where you have way more talks than slots. And I'm curious about the other end of the spectrum, and sort of what you've seen on that side, where you potentially don't have enough talks, and what you can do about that, whether it's trying to garner more people, restricting slots, lowering your standards, like what sort of approaches do you take there?
This is really hard.
Don't lower your standards if at all possible. No. Hit Twitter, hit Facebook, and find people you know who have given talks in the past, are willing to give talks. Ask around. Try something different. Try doing redesignate a section as a segment as birds of a feather session, where people just show up and sign up, spur of the moment to do things, or find someone who's willing to do a free training.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Just go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, there's so many different things. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're an organizer, you want to bring content, and that content could be in several different formats, and trying to get content that fits your venue and the theme that you're trying to hit.
Think one day, one track. Then you only need like 6 speakers.
Yeah.
In fact, we recommend if you email info@securitybsides.org, we can send you we have a sort of starter kit for doing a B-sides, which applies to pretty much any conference. The big recommendation is one day, one track to get started if you've never run a conference before, particularly if a smaller region. You have a question back there?
Yeah, I had a question about putting in a CFP that is not a specific technical talk in InfoSec. So I was in Proving Ground, and I was a past software developer in law school, and I submitted a legal talk, and I kind of really struggled with the CFP on, hi, I'm going to come in and do a legal talk. How much legal background do I need to put into the CFP so you have any idea what I'm talking about? So do you have any recommendations in general when it's not a super technical?
So that was actually one of the things we talked about earlier.
I'm so excited for
Go-
this.
Yes, you had. By the way, Wendy had a fantastic talk today.
She
You all need
really
to go up
did.
and see the recording.
Okay.
It was fantastic.
But Tony had some thoughts earlier today about specifically this topic, about
Right.
the CFP section.
So I think if you submit something that is related to the InfoSec field, but not super technical, it would definitely help to use the words and terms that we can understand and grasp, because a lot of lawyer speak goes way over my head. But if you can give me metaphors and analogies, that's more than sufficient.
Short
That was
one-syllable
half
words.
of Chris.
Short one-syllable words are good.
I feel like half of my mentor's job was I don't know what that word means to you.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right.
so that's good feedback, because if they don't know what it is, then chances are the audience doesn't know. So we have a problem in InfoSec where we're kind of stuck in this echo chamber where we just like preach to the choir. We're like, oh, we need to talk about user awareness. And it's like, oh, well,
No.
you guys know about user awareness. What we need to do is bring in people from other fields to talk to us about things like privacy, compliance, auditing, management, whatever, law, psychology, and then we need to go out to other industries and talk to them. And in order to do so, and in order to be successful with this, we need to use a common language.
One thing I would actually, this is actually something I've had a discussion with a number of colleagues. If you're having trouble getting your talk submitted to a security conference, submit it to a non-security conference. There are tons of development conferences. There are tons of other industry-specific conferences. Tech is a large umbrella. We are one small part of it. And we're the ones that focus on security, but that doesn't mean that people in other fields don't need to hear about this as well.
Right.
Submit a security talk, submit a web application security talk to a web application conference.
So it was actually two pieces of advice that your question brought up to me that we were discussing earlier as we were planning our panel here. One is that when you're submitting your talk, alter your bio, focus in your bio on the parts that are relevant to your talk's content.
Right.
And most security conferences, no one's going to care if you're a CISSP or not,
Yeah.
unless your talk is about certifications, in which case it may be relevant. The other thing is, and I'm sure my panelists have some thoughts on this, is that the whole many eyes make all bugs shallow. So if you're not sure about your abstract, even if you're positive about your abstract, get someone else to read it.
Yes.
Just in general, make sure you have bring it down. People say, is this a talk you would want to see? Like, does this excite you? But the other thing is, particularly if you're in a field that touches on security, say legal stuff like that, bring that to someone who is not a lawyer or who's not trained in legal and say, would you go see this? Does this make sense to you?
Right.
So you can get that perspective, like your mentor was giving to you, going, I don't know what these 12 words mean. This could mean anything.
Before I submit any talk, I have 3 friends that I asked to review. I have a very technical
You
one.
have 3 friends?
For the purposes of this.
I wouldn't be friends with this fucker. Are you kidding?
So I have someone very technical, someone very technical, someone who's not technical,
And then me.
and just a third party, just another set of eyes, someone who I consider a peer at work or something that will review something for me, just to say, hey, is this something you would like to see? What are your thoughts? Just to kind of bounce that off. And sometimes they have given me very harsh feedback. The technical guys, a lot of my talks are a little bit more soft skill. Technical is like, nah, I don't want to see this.
And
Okay.
Also, this also falls into the whole know your audience thing. So you're not going to want to go to, I don't know. I don't have a good example.
Don't take a DFR talk to the compliance folks.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Right.
Don't take a secure development talk to the compliance folks.
One thing that I like to do is before I submit a talk anywhere, I'll look up the conference that I'm looking to submit to and look at the past 2 years' presentations and say, see, okay, this is the kind of talks they accept. Would my content fit this? Would the audience be interested in this?
And really, I'm sorry, was there another question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, please.
Yeah.
Hi, I'll preface it by saying I only speak English, but I'm just wondering if you guys have ever received talks or would consider talks in another language. like not English?
Yeah, so we have a lot of non-native English speakers presenting at Proving Grounds, actually.
Yeah, at this Proving Grounds too.
I think this year we had at least one or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, Virginia Robbins is French, and she's presenting a talk on fileless malware. And she's giving a fantastic talk.
So for non-native speakers, I would actually... I don't know if you would want to say that you're a non-native speaker in the CFP or not.
It's usually
it's pretty
not,
evident.
It's not always evident.
But sometimes when it is evident, I try to take that into consideration when I review. Like,
Sure.
okay, this content's still good, and if they have something to share, I still want to give them a venue to share.
Yeah, I would actually think the opposite. And the ones that I've read, at least, sometimes their grammar and their English is probably better than native English speakers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
So just to clarify, so not necessarily accent-based, but the actual presentation itself. Like if it was entirely in French, is that something that's because like there's a conference.
Maybe in B-Sides Paris.
Yeah, I mean generally, I mean most conferences these days are actually in English, regardless of where you go in the world. I mean, there's lots of conferences that are language specific, but anything that pulls an international audience is generally in English. Unfortunately, good for.
I would say that no, there are a lot of Latin American conferences in Spanish.
That's true.
But they will often have an English language track even at that.
Right. So I actually spoke at a conference in Colombia, and almost all the talks were in English, and they were doing simultaneous They had simultaneous translation into Spanish, French, and Portuguese, and Japanese actually going on for people who were not comfortable with English. It's a little out of scope. If you give a talk to a non-native English-speaking population, jokes don't work.
And you need to slow the fuck down, because they're translating in their heads.
But seriously, jokes just don't work.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question. There in the back, and then we need to wrap it up.
Yeah, because food.
Yes, because food.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being there and answer our questions. This is my first time to BSides.
Yay!
Welcome. So I'm really excited to actually present here sometime whenever, either here or somewhere, because you just told us that, unlike Black Hat and DEF CON, where they see your bios and how many times you have presented and how famous are you, you actually look at the content. Because honestly, I was attending one talk, and I have a startup. I'm a founder of a startup, and the area I was working on, I was attending those talks, and it was interesting to see how customers are thinking about that problem. And I think I don't know how you feel about it, but I think like as a vendor, not about your product, but as a vendor, I felt like talking about the challenges that we have to reach to these customers and get their data and share with us and work with us to build these products. So I wonder if you gave a chance to people like me to speak, and if yes, what's the next step that I should be doing for the next event?
Absolutely.
To Proving Grounds?
Yeah,
Submit to Proving Grounds.
Submit to Proving Grounds if you haven't been doing public speaking at a major conference. Clearly, please submit to the main tracks as well. Every year, I don't think we have it this year. Most years we have a few talks that get submitted to Proving Ground where the speaker is just so outstanding that we've actually in the last year we had 2 talks.
We had one that we kicked over this year.
Yeah, they had 2 talks last year that were so good they kicked it over to us, and actually both of them were given in I think Common Ground, but they got to keep their mentors, so they got their.
Yeah.
But the talks were good enough that there was too many Proving Ground submissions, and there were 2 talks that these 2 said, you know what, these would be great in the main tracks, and so they had mentors and they were brand new speakers, never spoken, but gave 15-minute long presentations, and they were awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, something like that is just really how you position it. We kind of hit on earlier, we not necessarily want to hear a product pitch, but if you were to position that something like, how do you work with vendors to build better products, so that people here can understand the life cycle, because I forgot who was presenting earlier, but no one raised their hands when they say, oh, who likes talking to vendors, Right? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, if we could understood, well, vendors are part of that conversation. That's a way to introduce your topic appropriately.
Just don't call your talk vendors, how to work with them. However,
And follow the fucking directions.
yeah, but call it vendors might actually get accepted. I would actually bump that up just for
Developers.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Developers.
But
I'm cool with that.
okay, so we do need to wrap it up. Any final thoughts? I know my final thought is read the fucking directions and then follow them.
So I have one final thought. Something that we didn't cover is when you're submitting, if you have the room, provide an outline. Show us that. I mean, probably I know I do before I submit. You have a thought process of what's going on, what you want to present, how you're going to present it. Use the space and show how you're going to actually get to your talk. That provides us as the reviewers a good, clear understanding of where you're going to take this talk and what's going to go on. You know, a quick bullet list. These are the 5-7 topics that I'm going to cover. This is the format I'm going to cover it in. Even if it's not fully baked out, I mean, start sketching that out really helps us as reviewers.
Details.
To follow up on what he's saying, having that outline in place saves you a shit ton of work if your talk actually gets accepted. Because now, hey, you've got a basis for your slides.
Yeah. And so mine is kind of like a two-parter. First of all, don't be afraid to submit something just because you think someone has covered it in another talk. It's okay, because you might have a fresh perspective or give us information in your CFP that we might not have seen in a previous talk. And then also, if you submit a CFP about something you're really passionate about, that comes across in your writing, and we're more excited to accept it because it's something you're actually interested in, and we can see that by the level of detail you give us, the information that you give us, instead of something like, oh, IoT is cool right now, I guess I'll do an IoT talk.
Yeah. So raise your hands if you've done a fair enough, if you speak regularly at conferences. Okay. I would say that I do as well. I would estimate that anywhere between 30 to 60% of my talks in a year get rejected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Writing CFPs is really hard, and the only way to get better at it is to do it a lot. So don't be disparaged if you submit to a conference and it gets rejected. Don't be disparaged if you submit to 3 or 4 or 5 conferences. You will start getting talks accepted, particularly if you can get good feedback on what's going on. But the first couple are going to be hard.
Plus,
even if you've been submitting for years, you're still going to get.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've been speaking for 15
I had 2
years.
talks.
I mean, look at David's hair. I mean, and he still gets rejected.
I do.
but anyways, thank you all
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Yes, thank you for coming.